Hello, and welcome to the second episode of our continuing podcast on Walt Disney live action remakes, live action remorse. I am Roxana,
And I am Nikki.
and today we are covering the feature film Maleficent, based on the film Sleeping Beauty, which in turn is based on the fairy tale by Charles Perrault.
Yes.
This one has had a little less dread attached to it generally than the first episode,
Yeah.
because it's just generally better. Like, it's not broken in the same ways throughout. It does break a little bit in the last third, but it does. But I'm getting ahead of
Yeah,
myself. But
we're getting ahead.
overall, we were feeling a little better about approaching this one because it's a generally more even movie with regards to quality and some of its narrative ideas, and actually, shows probably more overall investment in terms of what is actually in the movie,
hmm
like in terms of its text. And furthermore, I think it just has a pretty strong central character in the through the character of Maleficent as depicted here.
Yeah. When we did Alice, I hadn't seen it since I was a child, and that also goes for this
Mm-hmm.
one. Although it came out a couple years later, so I was an older kid. When we were going into Alice, I had no idea if I would like it or hate it. It was kind of up in the
Mm-hmm.
air.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I was pretty confident that it would at least be okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. My memory of it was pretty, like, strong of this one, despite, I've seen it less times than Alice, because for some reason, Alice is like somewhat of a comfort movie for me sometimes, to just kind of put on in the background. Like, it's not one that I pay a lot of attention to. It's just something that I kind of have on in the back sometimes. This one I've seen maybe twice, maybe twice, yeah. And um, like I said, it's a much more even experience on the whole.
hmm
Not that there aren't still some kind of structural editorial problems, because there are. They're just not as it's not like walking over hot coals here. It's not a bed of them. There's just some kind of hot spots there that aren't covered quite as well. What do you want to bring attention to first off?
Um, Normally I would say we should start with going into the original film, but you actually read the Charles Perrault fairy tale first.
Yes.
So I would
Yes.
like to hear a little bit about that and how it relates to the to both of these.
Okay, so I did not a lot of digging, but I, decided to look into what sort of version of the tale would be particularly extant around the time that Walt Disney started conceptualizing making the movie in the late 30s, I believe. And that would have been, you know, the version of the story that was cataloged in Leonora Blanche Allen and Andrew Lang's Blue Fairy Book, translated by Robert Salmon. And, I decided to read it, and for the most part, it's interesting because when you like reading the first two-thirds of the story, this is mostly the same story. There are some elements that, are that some alterations were made adaptationally. For example, in total there are seven fairies in the original tale, and in the in the Disney film, there's only 3, so that they can actually get to be characters, so that they can actually, have characterizations and not kind of, be spread too thin writing wise across a movie that is not even 90 minutes long.
Yes.
And it's so funny because no matter what you do, Maleficent is an advanced hater, because the old fairy, as they call her in the story, shows up to the christening, gets very angry that she was not invited, but just sort of fumes there for a while. Like, she shows up at the beginning of the ceremony and just sits there for a while, very angrily. And,
it's like when I went to my ex-wife's new wedding.
But yeah, the same procession of events happens. She places a curse upon Sleeping Beauty to die, and then, because the final fairy's gift was not able to be granted before the old fairy cursed her, she was able to sort of ease the direction of the curse from death to, a deep sleep that was caused by a spindle.
Yes.
Spindle of a spinning wheel. And, this is also something interesting, because in Maleficent, in the movie, they do make a point that they have, destroyed as many of the spindles in the land as they could, which is closer to something that the original tale does do than, like they kind of make that a very loud point compared to the Walt Disney film.
Yeah.
So there's bits and pieces from in both cases wherein, the writers of both films have they've doubled back toward the original tale and adapted elements so that they can function for the purposes of a feature film, because these are fairy tales that were meant to be told to children as they lie in bed to sleep for the night. And they don't entirely, especially with their lack of specificity, they're not necessarily designed to cover the length of time that you would get in a 90-minute movie.
Absolutely. I did not read it, so I can't comment on much, but it seems interesting.
Yeah.
I skimmed the Wikipedia page, and how there were like 20 different versions before it became the recognizable one.
Yeah, because that's something you start to get into with any fairy tale adaptation, and it's probably something that we will be getting into in future, because so many of these are based off of fairy tales and fables and ballads.
Yeah.
We've got Mulan on the horizon, the far horizon, but it's over there.
Cinderella is next.
Cinderella is next. It's very interesting, the changes that have to be made to facilitate a movie.
Yeah. I was gonna say, should we get into the film now?
Yes.
I had heard good things about this film. I had never seen it before. This is gonna be one of the few instances on this podcast where I've seen the remake and I've not seen the original. Most of these, it's either gonna be I've seen the original and not the remake, or I've seen neither. The only other one is Cruella, but that's a ways away. We're not worried about her right now.
Exactly. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Trust me, we will get there, and we'll be happy for one fleeting moment. To wind back the clock, go to Sleeping Beauty. This is one I heard good things about. I know classic Disney fans think that this one is very good, and I can see why. The animation is, gorgeous. It's one of the best looking
beautiful. It's the
Disney movies really ever. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's so goddamn smooth. I can't imagine all the work that went into this. All the
It's
design
incredible.
work is amazing. It's so vibrant and colorful, and
Mm-hmm.
character designs are fantastic.
They really believed in this one, even if it was somewhat for naught on the financial end, because this film did bomb at the
Yes.
box office when it came out.
Yeah, this
Which,
mhm.
it
it
feels
was a
unfortunate to me, but yeah.
it was the most expensive film Disney had made at that point, and
And you can tell.
yeah, you can really tell it. You can see the money in the movie. You can't say that a lot of movies that come out right now, but you can see where the money went here. And
You can't say that about a lot of movies coming out right now, including Disney live action remakes.
um, I think I read that it is kind of one of those things where like, oh, it was for naught, but then in the long run it worked out. In all the re-releases, I think this is the second highest grossing film of that year with the re-releases, just behind Ben-Hur. And Ben-Hur was
Mm.
like the biggest thing in the world, so that's impressive. And
Mm.
yeah, I can see why this has a lasting legacy, especially because of Maleficent, who we'll end up talking about a lot, obviously. But
Yes, yes.
yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it's a good one. I do think that you know there is one scene, because that's the thing, right? Like the king and queen are not really characters, as tends to be the case for a lot of fairy tales in general. And there's a scene in Sleeping
Yeah,
Beauty that is kind
yeah,
of wedged
it's
in there.
Sleeping Beauty. Aurora is like the only character in this movie, and the fairies. The fairies are characters. So you got
Yeah, they're
four
pretty firm.
characters.
Yeah, especially because like it's important that Aurora also be a character. I think Aurora gets a bad rap in terms of her characterization,
Mhm.
because people do see her as kind of a nothing.
Yeah,
And
there's been a lot
mhm,
of Disney princess discourse over the past decade, 2 decades,
decade and
and
change, yeah, 2 decades, I want to say.
no one really talks about Aurora at all. And
No, no,
yeah, I don't I can't see why. She's delightful.
I agree. We'll obviously get to this one later, but I feel like a lot of people kind of look at Disney princesses through kind of the lens of the way they were later responded to when The Little Mermaid came out, because they're like, oh, she's the fiery headstrong character who sort of pursues what she believes in. And I'm like, I don't see why that's not also the case for some of the prior princesses. I just feel like it took on a different shape because of cultural context.
Hmm.
And you know like I look at Aurora and I see someone who is very content with the world that she lives in. She's genuinely very loving, but doesn't necessarily take that much shit. She's not that passive. She's not passive the way people describe her as being often when they're engaging in the princess discourse.
Yes.
She has a personality. It's just, I don't. I'll be real. Sometimes when we look at what the material is that is being adapted, I don't know what people are expecting sometimes. you
Yeah.
know we're dealing with material wherein character is an afterthought compared to the almighty story, the narrative, or like the plot of things that are happening. Because again, like all you really needed in a number of these tales are, there once was a fair maiden. I don't really have I don't think it's unfair to call a number of these criticisms bad faith, and we will get into that a number of times. over this podcast because
Ooh.
the hard times have not yet begun.
I'll say about Maleficent right now, it doesn't do the thing that some others do in trying to correct for those criticisms in the remake. But that's getting ahead of
Hmm.
ourselves. But
Hmm.
Aurora is a very nice character.
Hmm.
This is a musical, and Maleficent is
Yes,
not.
it's a musical.
This I'm not really mad about that because I feel like there's only like one particularly good song here, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't miss it that much. We'll get to that scene in Maleficent where I feel like I could have had them sing in there, but yeah, I think this was their third ever princess movie at Disney after Snow White and Cinderella,
Hmm.
and
Hmm. It's sort of odd because you kind of feel like there's more of them,
yeah, there are
more of
more
the
of them, but
classic
you don't
ones.
realize that most of them come from like the '90s.
Yeah, most of them come post Disney Renaissance. They're not, look, I'm not about to cape for Mr. Disney here because Mr. Disney is no friend of mine.
You
And,
don't love Walter Disney and all his
I don't love
political
Walter Disney and
opinions and
his
personality.
all, all I've got to say about Walter Disney, what a pisser, am I right?
Oh, what a pisser.
But no, I do think a lot of engagements with um, Walt Disney and the work that he produced to get it out of the way because I don't want to have it sort of clog up the further discussion here. I think a lot of people see his work as being far more toothless than it is, funnily enough. I'm not saying that it's the hardest things in the world because it's Disney. It's Walt Disney and he but he understood that just appealing to, like, he literally is quoted as having said, um I if you're just aiming for children, then you're doomed. I'm paraphrasing there, but he did
Yeah.
say something to that effect.
It kind of
Um,
has shifted, the meaning of family film. It used to actually
yeah,
be
yeah.
for the family. And then,
Families, like families. Hmm.
animation even being considered like exclusively a children's thing was, I don't know, probably coming out like a couple years after um, what's it called, Sleeping Beauty, with the
Hmm.
Flintstones and all that being rerun as like Saturday morning crap, right? I wouldn't say the idea was cemented in consciousness yet that this is like baby stuff.
Yeah, no, I don't think that Disney is as fundamentally responsible for that in terms of the works. Now, you can make the argument that ancillary materials like, Disney World itself, like Disneyland, and various pieces of merchandising that have been sold over the years, including when he was around, like, you can make the argument that those contributed to the culture as it is now, right?
Yeah.
But and if we look at the works themselves, they are not anywhere near as solely designated for children as people often make them out to be. And furthermore, and again, I'm going to say this so that it doesn't, clog up the furtherance of the discussion. I think the way, because we're getting really into it now, because Alice in Wonderland was not a fairy tale, and this is the first fairy tale movie that we're covering on the podcast, and this goes for future episodes as well. The manner in which people speak of fairy tales, as being, oh, did you know in the real story, this horrible thing happened and that horrible thing happened. It's just like, these are fairy tales, Karen. these are in many cases born of the oral tradition. That means there are many translations of many adaptations of stories that were told and permutated over several years, several decades, maybe even a century. because that's how this works. If you look back at the archetypes of Cinderella, it does not start with the Cendrillon story. The archetypes go way further back than that. So you can't tell me about which is the real story. Do you know how many variations of Sleeping Beauty exist to begin with?
So many.
There's so many of them.
Like I said, I skimmed the Wikipedia thing, and it's like the earliest one is ancient Rome that people credit as being part of the lineage.
Yeah, exactly. So just going forward, because I don't want to repeat it again and again, though I probably will, knowing me, but I don't want to repeat it again and again, but I want to say that people are very precious about something that they don't seem to understand. And they are often arguing in fundamentally bad faith about something that they don't really care about. They're just using it as a cudgel to leverage against something that they don't particularly like in turn. They're using one thing they don't like to tear down another thing they don't like. And I'm definitely, I know you're not going to do that on this podcast, and I'm not going to do it either. That's not what we're in the business here for.
Yeah. But oh my god, people are so dumb, and they make the movies worse.
They make the movies worse because I'm gonna know everything that I'm talking about is going to go on to make these movies progressively worse.
Yes.
Like, it's guaranteed. Like, we know this. The further down we go, the worse this is gonna get. And all because people hold a disdain for both the source materials and, like, the movies that adapted those materials, and they keep trying to placate and pander to the kinds of people who don't like either material. So what are we doing here? And this movie, Maleficent specifically, when we get to that, Maleficent is actually not performing any of that pandering in particular.
No.
So it's something that I do respect about the movie, genuinely.
Yeah, I do want to note that when we say that people are talking about these films and criticizing in bad faith, we're not talking about Rachel Zegler calling the prince in Snow White a stalker. We're not part of the culture war. She is cool.
We're not.
Leave her alone.
Yeah, no. Leave her alone. We're not.
That's a whole other thing. There's a whole other side to the reaction of, like, Pearl clutching. Oh, how could you criticize this thing? Oh my god, it's too precious, it's special, it's perfect.
It's perfect, unassailable text.
These things
it is
are
gospel.
not above criticism. We just need to
They are
approach
not.
them with the right criticism and good faith.
Because, again, these are stories based off of very old stories that are coming from fundamentally different values than the ones that we're espousing nowadays, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not saying people in the past were fundamentally regressive or dumb, because that's a mistake unto itself. But things change, values change over various cultures over time. I feel very firmly that there's things to learn from these works, and that these works have value unto themselves, but, I don't think that means that they're unassailable texts that should not be altered or criticized or engaged with in any meaningful way. I'm also with Rachel Zegler there. I'm not part of the culture war. I'm not affiliated with you.
Yeah. If I could use an example, jumping ahead, you're talking about, like, the changing values. Beauty and the Beast. You go back to, like, the original version, and part of that story, the purpose is to, ease young French women into their arranged marriages. Saying, oh,
yes, exactly.
your husband that you've been arranged to might seem like a beast, but he's actually a beautiful man on the inside. Don't complain.
Yes, exactly.
And people, like, use that as, like, a gotcha against the Disney movie, and it's like, But that's not what the Disney movie is about, though.
The Disney movie, we'll get to that, but we are a ways away, so I will say and then bring it up again. Like, I'll pick it up again when we get back to it. Like, that movie is, partly very much defined by a queer man, by a gay man, who is pulling a lot of inspiration from another queer man's vision of the story. We can't we gotta take this stuff on good faith, please. Can we do that to those who are kind of shit slinging a little bit about it? Just
That's
take it in
part
good faith.
of the reason that we started this podcast, so that we could actually have conversations about these
Yes,
things
good
in good
faith
faith.
conversations.
Because it feels like one of those things, like Star Wars, that you can't talk about with.
You can't have a conversation.
As soon as you start talking about it with, other people, everyone suddenly loses their goddamn minds.
I've had so many discussions that went south, and I haven't had nearly as many discussions that went south about this particular subject, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen constantly. I you want to have a valuable understanding and connection with what a work is doing wrong, because that's interesting to me, how many works aren't functioning as they clearly intend to. And we can't get to that point if we're just engaging in a bunch of paratextual shit slinging. You can't convince me that that the people who are leveraging these fairy tales and the original movie as a cudgel even care about the sources to begin with. It's the same thing. I'm not saying you need to care about the source, but it's there, and we exist in a context, and we're not in a vacuum. We're not
People don't
in a
care
bubble.
about the source. They care about winning.
They care about winning more than anything.
Winning an argument even when, Walter Disney can't hear you.
He's dead! Walter Disney is dead and buried. But, yeah. Back to the movie.
Back to the movie. One of my favorite parts of Sleeping Beauty is Maleficent. And I think that kind of goes
tremendous.
for every person who has ever seen this movie ever.
Yes. She's tremendous.
Design is amazing. It is gorgeous,
It's
but
perfect.
it is also scary. The voice work by Eleanor Audley is fantastic. She is completely on
so
point.
Good.
She is an incredibly threatening villain, but she's having so much fun. And you have her, and you watch it, and you have fun. And I totally understand why one would want to give this character her own movie, regardless of what it would be about.
Yeah, exactly. And it is worth noting that, like, Maleficent was pitched by the head of Disney's animation,
Don
at
Hahn.
the time. Yeah, Don Hahn. Yeah, Don Hahn.
Yeah.
He pitched it as an animated movie. It's clear, he is credited as a producer on the movie, I believe. He has an executive producer credit. You can see why someone would have a lot of passion for Maleficent more than pretty much any of the other characters, because she is so strong as a force and as a characterization that you could feel immediately there's a lot to be done here.
Yeah, it was the early 2000s. Wicked had just premiered on Broadway. Don Hahn watched it and he said, "Wait a minute. We have intellectual property. Why don't we just do Wicked at Disney?" And then this started as an animated project, and it actually switched to a live action project, I think in combination because they got Angelina Jolie and she was interested, and because they finally bought Pixar, and then after that they shuffled everything around at their animation department, and then it ended up being another live action remake. So it's another we're not in the era yet where they're greenlighting live action remakes just to cash in on the trend. This was before
Yeah,
Alice.
yeah. Again, this is not so much about brand refreshment at all. This was pitched as a passion project, and I think that passion follows through, even in the face of things that don't entirely work about the movie.
Yes.
I think it is a movie made by people who care very much. I don't think it always works, because, Stromberg was a first-time director. He was fresh off of working on Alice in Wonderland with Burton, and also his Academy Award win with Rick Carter on Avatar. They sort of deemed like, okay, this guy has a set of skills that might prove valuable, because when you're doing entirely digital production design, you're working with animators very closely. You're working with design teams very closely. You are heading a bunch of other people who are also running their own department heads. You can understand at least why someone would look at all of this, at his sort of body of work. He used to work at Industrial Light and Magic, and you can see why you look at his body of work and someone would say, hey, this guy's got experience. Maybe we should get him to direct the movie. He directed most of the movie, with John Lee Hancock taking on reshoots for the first act of the movie, and then the rest of it, by and large, I believe, is Stromberg.
Yeah. This is like Stromberg's only real directorial movie. I think he has like a short film, but he didn't even do the sequel to this, interestingly enough.
No, it was Joaquin Roning, I think it was.
Yeah, I believe you're correct.
And, I do know that he had a couple of other things that were in development, but they fell through, and I just gotta assume he got burnt out, because that's how these things tend to go.
Yeah, his direction is perfectly fine. It is good.
It's fine, yeah.
But pretty famously, Angelina Jolie was very influential in the direction everything here is going.
Yes.
This is something we didn't point out at the time, and now I feel stupid for not, mentioning it. I only realized it when I saw it in a Letterboxd review, and that the entire, crux of this film, the entire point of this film is about, the love of an adoptive mother. And she's very famous for having several adoptive children.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even process that.
I feel stupid for not catching that.
It's very much something that, it became her baby over the course of development. And to this day, she's still trying to get a third Maleficent off the ground, even though we know it's not going to make any money, because that's passion, baby. She doesn't give a shit.
Yep.
She's not here for brand refreshment. She's here to return to a character that she loves playing deeply. I see no reason to hate on that.
Oh, absolutely. I think we will get into this more as we talk about the movie, but she is the heart and soul of this entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can see how much she
1,000%.
cares about it in the performance. She is fucking going for an Oscar,
That's the great part, right? And you did watch some prior Angelina Jolie movies in preparation for this podcast.
Yes.
Because she is a very good actress who is not often in great movies that really showcase her talents.
Yes, she is a good actress. She does not have a very good filmography.
Yeah.
I watched after Maleficent and before we're recording now, I watched Girl Interrupted, which she is only a supporting role in. It stars Winona Ryder, and I watched Gia, which she is the lead in, and it's a very, very big lead. I won't get into them right now. Didn't very much like Girl Interrupted. Thought Gia was pretty good. I didn't like Jolie in Girl Interrupted. I think that performance really, really missed the mark and didn't really understand what was required. But Gia, she is very good, especially in the third act.
I think we should probably start in terms of talking about Maleficent with like beyond Jolie's contributions. I think we should start with maybe one of the only major ties that the movie has to the Sleeping Beauty Walt Disney film, which are the fairies. Now, the fairies in the original movie are, they're lovely. They're kind of absent-minded. What were their names?
Farkle,
Mary...
Farkle, and Felicia.
No!
Do you want me to just look it up?
Yeah, I'm looking it up.
Okay.
Yes. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather.
Oh, I was kind of close.
And, they have a good trio dynamic, and, they care for Aurora very deeply. In the absence of sort of, like, in Maleficent, the heart of the movie is Maleficent, and in this movie, I would say, the main core thrust, like emotional thrust, is the relationship between Aurora and Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. It's just, a lot of this is just her three mothers just trying very hard to take care of this young woman, make sure that she's okay in the wake of this terrible thing that has been done to her. It's very important to them that she be okay and that she be safe. And then, they make a terrible mistake that leads to Maleficent, finding them because Aurora was supposed to be in hiding. And in Maleficent, the three fairies are not the same characters even. They don't have the same names. Their names are Flittle, Knotgrass, and Thistlewit.
Yes.
And they are kind of terrible.
Yeah, I do not like them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're... Well, first, they're very unlikable.
They're very unlikable from the very outset. As you mentioned when we were watching, they look pretty terrible in fairy form.
Yes. They are terrifying.
They did. This was, and like I said last time when talking about the Red Queen's giant head in Alice in Wonderland, I wish to give no hate toward Carrie Villegas and like the Digital Domain team and everybody working under him. It's there's a lot of good work in this movie. Genuinely, there's a lot of very interesting and lovely visual effects. It's just also there was a lot to do, and maybe they bit off a little more than they could chew in terms of some of the conceptual ideas, like some of the ideas, and one of them is the fact that those are weird little human faces on weird little tiny fairy bodies.
Yeah,
strange.
I would say overall the VFX in here feel, if I'm being charitable, rushed, because that's probably also the reality of it at
it's
Disney.
Usually the reality of it. Yeah.
There's a lot of blue screen in this. Often it looks kind of embarrassing for a $100 million movie.
Still iffy.
And there's a lot of fucking blue screen. We mentioned Lord of the Rings last time as Disney trying to capitalize on that. I think there's still a little bit of that in here where there's
still a little bit of that.
Maybe Maleficent can be our Lord of the Rings.
Maleficent, and it does have, because it's clear to me when I watch the productions of Joe Roth, the fantasy productions of Joe Roth, who did produce this movie, and also the Snow White and the Huntsman movie with Kristen Stewart. He's done a couple of movies like this, and they're very similar in that sense, and it feels like he's really chasing after his Lord of the Rings, and he just can't seem to get it, Yeah,
this was actually the same year that the Hobbit trilogy ended, so I feel like at that point I would have been like, it's not going to happen.
It's not gonna happen. They couldn't even make it happen with the guy.
The other Lord of the Rings book with Peter Jackson, and it still didn't happen. So. And
he wanted to die.
It's not gonna happen.
But it's clear that he wants his Lord of the Rings, and is still kind of chasing it every time he makes a big fantasy movie. And, I know that Robert Stromberg, whose chief specialization is, visual effects and special effects that you do in post-production, he very much regretted not having more sets built, not focusing on that in the time that he had. I think I give him credit, and I will be charitable about a lot of this because, that's the other thing, right? People will complain about certain aspects about these movies and they'll call filmmakers lazy for it, and it's just like, I'm not gonna call them lazy. We're not gonna fucking do that here. This is pretty squarely on the amount of time that it takes to get good work done, and it's the amount of time that Disney is never gonna give you, because as of now, how many months did you say they have until Avengers Doomsday as of the time of this recording? You said 7 months?
It was more than 7 months. But it comes out in May next year.
They don't have a lot of time. Disney's never gonna give you that time. That's not a thing they do. They haven't
started filming yet. They don't even have a finished script.
They don't have a finished script, and this is that's the thing about this, right? Looking at this movie, right? This is a movie that was clearly storyboarded out and planned and written, and it was locked in before they went in and actually shot everything, and then they were locked in when they did the post-production. This is a normal release. This is a normal production. That's happening over there right now. They're not even started filming. They haven't started, and they have to be done with that by May next year. That's terrible. Mm-hmm. They're never gonna give you that time, and they're never gonna give you that money.
Oh my god!
And Robert Downey Jr. is gonna be paid a small country's worth of money, while people are probably going to die making this fucking thing.
I'd imagine dying for
Avengers Doomsday.
Avengers Doomsday. I would kill myself if I wasn't already dead.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, doubling back, the visual effects, they vary in quality a lot. There's a lot of interesting creature designs. I'm not sure how much I love them personally, but I'm very particular about this.
Yeah, I don't think the creature designs are that great, but Maleficent looks really good, so I think that kind of makes up for everything else in terms of design.
Maleficent looks fantastic in the final major principal makeup job by the great Rick Baker.
The great Rick Baker, one of his last his last work.
One of his last movies. He said that he would take on a consultation role if the time ever came, but I guess no one's ever asked him, and that makes me upset. Maleficent looks great enough to warrant having just remember when we said that the Alice in Wonderland poster, it's just Johnny Depp's head? The theatrical release poster is kind of similar. It's just Angelina Jolie in front of her white background as Maleficent. And it's just yes. You know what? I'd rather have Angelina Jolie looking at me anyway. So, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, it's fine. It is a striking image because it doesn't have Johnny Depp's smug fucking grin on his face.
Yep.
So we should probably get into the plot of this movie. We start out many years before Sleeping White. You got little Maleficent, and she lives with the Moors.
The Moors. She doesn't live with the Moors. She lives in the Moors.
She lives in the Moors. Oh, I thought the people from the Moors were called Moors.
No. The place is called the Moors, and the people that live there are the Faithful.
Moorlings.
They're just the fair folk.
What if a guy who was Moor moved to the Moors and spread Islam?
No!
Why did they call it the Moors? That's already a name.
Why did they call it the Moors? I don't know. And they're sticking with that. To my knowledge, they do stick with that in the sequel.
Anyway, she lives in the Moors with all the Fae folk, and it's a little communist utopia.
Yeah, there you go.
And then there's the evil king, in the kingdom next door who
Stefan.
wants to take. Yeah.
Wait, no,
Well, isn't Stefan? No,
Stefan's the
Stefan's the boy
prince.
who becomes the king later.
No, yeah, the king. I don't remember the king's name because I'm not even sure he has one.
Yeah, he dies early in the movie. Anyways, so Stefan is from the kingdom, which is going to war with the Moors,
King Henry.
because they're fairies, and he doesn't like that. And Stefan sees the little Maleficent, who the actress does look a lot like Angelina Jolie. I put that in my notes. They found a little girl who looks very much like her.
Yes, they did.
And they fall in love, and then she grows into Angelina Jolie, and she's like, "No, you can't take over the Moors. I'm gonna use my big wings and kill you." And do you want to talk about the wings?
The wings, I think they're beautiful. I think the wings are beautifully, like on an aesthetic level, beautifully done. But they are also the they are the thematic crux of the entire movie in a way that doesn't entirely. I don't personally feel that it functions. I know someone who does think otherwise, but yeah.
Stefan comes back after many years,
yes,
and they spend the night together, and then he drugs her and cuts off her wings so that he can prove to the king that he killed Maleficent.
Yes.
But he just cuts off her wings.
Yes.
And, I think before that point in the movie, they do a very good job of making you, grow to love those wings. She feels so free. The sequences with them are so fun.
Yes.
And so it does actually have real weight when she loses them.
Yes.
And I guess I should, just say the thing that we're talking around the whole time, that her getting her wings cut off then is a metaphor for sexual assault.
Yes.
And, I saw that and I thought, that's a very big swing to go for in a Disney movie.
This wouldn't happen now.
Yeah, this wouldn't happen now. They would say, no, that's too dark.
That's too much.
People are, well, what if people say it's sexist or something? Or what if the right wing says it's not sexist enough? And, it's... I respect it. I respect going for it, but I'll just jump ahead in the plot. In the third act, final battle, she gets her wings back.
Oh. Okay.
Now, here's what you may be thinking, dear listener. What does that mean?
What did you mean by that?
Did she get unassaulted? I don't think you can do that. It was really good. It was really effective up to that point. I thought the point was trying to be she loses this and she goes into a very, very dark place.
She hurts
people. Even though she can never get that part of her back, she can learn to live and be happy. She can learn to move on. That she can find peace.
Yeah.
Even if this is something that is permanently gone from her, she can still live like a person. And then it says, no, it's not actually permanently gone. She can just get them back.
Especially because, in the last third of the movie, because that's sort of the whole plot, she she becomes very angry. She comes in during the christening, curses Aurora. She does this absolutely dreadful, thing to this child who didn't do anything. But that's because, she is effectively, she's lashing out. She's lashing out, and she's very angry at, justifiably at the man who did this to her. But she's not aiming it in the right way. She's hurting someone else to get to him, someone who is innocent. Literally innocent. That's a baby. She does an absolutely horrible thing, and it feels like this is very potent stuff thematically. This is very, the thematic through line up to this point is straight and true, right? I do want to say I really do like the core premise of this movie, where it is about someone who hurts someone who didn't do anything, out of her own, understandable rage at having something that belonged to her taken from her. And she slowly she tries to make some kind of amends over time, even if she doesn't realize that's what's happening, because she is and does want to be better than the thing that hurt her, better than the thing that took so much from her. But once you've made such a drastic decision, it does become a question of, can others forgive you, and can you forgive yourself, and what does that look like after the fact? And that's really interesting, all of that. And it ultimately coalesces in in the original tale, or so to speak, and in the movie, like the Walt Disney movie. There is a prince, and that's the way the curse is. You will you will be cursed until a prince comes along to effectively revive you through true love's kiss. And there is a genuinely interesting subversion of that, where this prince, he's just a guy, he's just some guy. And
yeah, they like each other.
Yeah, they do.
Aurora and him, they clearly want to be, a couple.
Yeah.
But they also just met today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no love. There's no true love there, right?
Meanwhile, the whole movie has been spent with Maleficent and Aurora growing this kind of really interesting close bond that there was a kind of light invocation on Elle Fanning's part, speaking on the nature of their relationship. Not Elle Fanning. Stromberg was speaking on the dynamic between them, and he described the contrast as the beacon of light versus darkness, and that it reminded him a little bit of the girl plucking petals from the flower in the 1931 Frankenstein. Obviously it's not as tragic as that, but it is that kind of idea of, here's this figure who I know I am meant to fear, but I don't know why I should fear them. No one has given me any reason to. They have this really interesting and lovely dynamic that is very much, it's the core relationship for the movie. And ultimately this pays off through, the idea that true love's kiss came from someone who genuinely cared for her in a non-romantic way. She was there for her her entire life, and there it is again, the idea that this is a very much a passion project for Jolie, because when baby Aurora first shows up, that's her own daughter. It's very much a movie.
It is both the baby Aurora and the 5-year-old Aurora.
Yes, both of them,
her daughters.
Yes.
And I read on the Wikipedia page that the reason for that with the 5-year-old is because that was the only child who was not afraid of her in full Maleficent makeup.
Yes.
Which is adorable.
Yes, I love that. I remember hearing that. I'm like, oh my god. Oh my god.
Yeah, but she's great in but maybe that's why the dynamic's so good. Where the little 5-year-old Aurora goes up to her and just hugs her on their leg, and she's like, get off of me. What are you doing?
when she picks her up and hugs the horn, I'm like, this is peak.
Oh my god.
This is perfect. These are the things about the movie that really work. These are the moments where it really sings.
Yes.
And they make me very happy, and I'm glad that they're in there, because it's not just about kind of thoughtlessly recreating beats that you recognize from movies that they're adapting. There is something new here. There's a permutation here that is not seen in the original movie, while it is also not denigrating the original movie in particular. And I really appreciate that. Yes. and it makes me, glad. But, all of this, it does culminate in the idea of, that true love's kiss coming from someone who cares for you so deeply, and it's not a romantic love, and it's, a motherly sort of bond. And I love it. And, it feels like she went through all of this pain and she lost her wings. And there was no reason for what was taken from her to be taken. But that doesn't mean that she could not have found something that means as much to her through this relationship. And, like something that means the world to her in, not the same way, but as much as her wings did.
Yes.
The idea in my mind that, because, there's that scene where Aurora's asking her about her wings, and you can see her just sort of being happy for the first time, even if it is bittersweet, about like reminiscing about her wings and how strong they were and how far she could fly. It's things like that really feel like they could have cut to the core of what was lost and what was gained. And so it can't help but feel a little undercut when I see that they give her wings back in a sense, because it feels like that idea that feels really evident to me, that, the movie is about her finding something that matters to her as much as that. And it's like, no, but you get your wings back too. And it's like, what? Where did you come from?
If I'm being charitable here, I could say, well, it's Aurora who, unlocks the cabinet with the wings on her own.
Yeah.
So it's now Aurora is the thing that has brought, life and innocence back to her.
Yes.
I could see maybe that was the idea, but it's still silly.
It's very silly, and I look at, like, this was something that I wanted to note when we watched it, but I wanted to save it for this podcast, and it's something that I've thought for years. Now, I don't think there's much mechanical reason for her to get her wings back. They do make a lot of adaptational changes to facilitate other things, and, for example, the fairy trio serves kind of very little purpose as a result of the centering of Maleficent. They don't get to, like, this is something that happens as a result of making Maleficent the main character, because suddenly 3 fairies that were so kind and so loving and cared deeply for Aurora, that role now must shift to Maleficent. And in order for that to function, Linda Wolverton, who did, like, this is her second time appearing on the podcast because she wrote Alice in Wonderland, she has the fairies reduced to little more than dim-witted comic fodder. They are incapable of attending to their child under their care. They become a vestigial element of Sleeping Beauty, the movie. They weren't deep characters to begin with, so you really end up with kind of nothing. And this is just sort of something that comes about as a consequence of the adaptational changes that were made. Now, there's a mechanical reason for that. Where it concerns her wings, I can't think of any mechanical reason why she gets them back. There's a big, like, the majority of the battle stuff, like the action stuff, doesn't even really demand the usage of her wings. She kind of just gets them back in the end as a victory note. Like, that's what the beat is about. And I've always imagined regarding the wings back, like her getting the wings back, is that, if the narrative did demand that her flight is restored, my thought would be that she gains different wings. That her old wings are never going to be hers again. The idea that, somehow, I'm not sure how, I'm not someone who, I'm not in the business of, like, sort of stapling things on to existing screenplays a little bit, because I've seen some people who do that a little bit. But, I have always thought, like, if you were going to give her wings back, they shouldn't be the same wings. Different from the ones that were stolen from her. For example, like you look at, Aurora unlocking the cabinet, right? and then suddenly the wings are sentient. This wasn't established
Yeah,
at any
it's
prior point.
why didn't they fly back when he cut them off?
Yeah, because it really
Was it because she was drugged?
maybe,
Oh my god,
but no, because
you're being too charitable.
it's evident that there is like that they have a separate mental process from Maleficent until they're reunited, and it's like, I don't really know what you're getting at here, guys. I feel like the allegory just kind of gets a little wrecked by that. I don't know why they're sentient, and I don't necessarily demand that every mechanic has a setup per se, but at some point it does feel like Wolverton was bending over backwards really hard to get her wings back, so that we can kind of have a happy ending, like, unambiguously, even though, Stefan's fucking dead as shit, but, whatever.
Yeah, it is interesting, you think about like the mechanics, and there was no, mechanical reason she needed them back. And
No.
overall, I think this is very interesting in how it diverts from the original so much. You can't just like slide it in.
Yeah.
We talk about the Wicked inspiration, and if you take like the 1939 Wizard of Oz and you say this is the same universe as Wicked, it mostly makes sense. You just say, "Oh, I didn't know all that stuff also happened."
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
It's just trying to give a different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and this, is also giving a different perspective on the story. But also, there are so many things that are just outright changed.
Yeah, yeah. Like, the idea, like, the central idea, like, at the very beginning of the movie, they say something like, let us take an old tale and make it anew, or tell it anew, or something like that. So, it's very much not, like...
The king
Mhm.
dies. He's dead.
The king is fucking
He
dead.
died.
He died. He got turned into a fucking pancake. He's fucking dead. But yeah, I have a lot of weird feeling, and I know that an allegory or a metaphor is allowed to shift its kind of target and parameters, but the problem, those parameters don't really get to shift very much to facilitate the metaphor changing with it. I know a thing can, like, a symbol can take on many different shapes, and I know that it can change over the course of a narrative, but the thing is, for me, fundamentally, I don't think what the wings represented did ever change or represent more than one thing in particular. I think it was always just kind of this one thing.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't
it's
fucking
it's
know, bro.
we watched this movie like half a week ago,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a week ago. I don't know. I'm not keeping track. And I've been thinking about this the whole time, and I can't square it up in a way that really makes sense.
No, me neither. I can't do it. It doesn't.
It's a hole. It's a hole.
It's a
in the movie.
hole. And you know what? Like, I will readily take the single hole over some of the stuff we were complaining about with Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Because, at the end of the day, most of the movie is pretty coherent. Most
Absolutely.
of...
I think we've just been talking about the third act,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think the movie does fall a lot in the third act.
Oh.
It kind of it goes from, we talk about, we love all the stuff with Maleficent and Aurora, and that relationship is at the center of the movie. And then Aurora is asleep, and then she's awake, but then they capture Maleficent, but then she has to go have this big CGI fight, and it does kind of fall into that thing that, a lot of blockbusters do now, where the plot just kind of stops for this big VFX
I want to be
final battle.
I want to be clear on something, and this has nothing to do, because, like, spectacle is spectacle no matter what, like, it's not one thing that you can attribute a lot of this stuff to, but it's definitely worth noting this came out like 2 years after the Avengers. I don't know if there were notes, like studio notes, it's saying,
This movie has a giant laser that shoots into the sky.
It does happen. It is a little more motivated than some of these, but it does happen.
It was 2014. That was the
style
style at the time.
It was the style at the time.
All right, I think we've harped on about the wings.
The wings,
enough.
yeah. I think we've made our point that it doesn't really work the way that it was intended to.
There are some things in this movie that don't work. We already mentioned the little ghoul troll designs. I don't really like them.
Little guys, little
Sharlto
boogers.
Copley is doing an accent from Venus. I don't know where it's supposed to be from. It's a very strange voice, and
It's
I don't
he
really
sounds
know what the point is.
it. It's readily apparent to me that it's supposed to be a Scottish accent, but he sounds like a Russian on the verge of swallowing his own tongue.
Yes.
You're not welcome here. No no hate intended here. And to be clear, like, I think when he's not speaking, he's pretty good. I just think he's speaking a lot
It
in
is
this
a
movie.
very physical performance
Yeah,
from
yeah.
him. He is, waving his arms around.
I like the this guy's not doing well throughout the majority of the movie. He's not feeling great. He's falling the fuck apart because he really is just a guy. He's just a mediocre asshole who leveraged someone else's suffering to get his way in life. And I think that is also something that feels very true and real. You know, the fact that he's just kind of this guy who did this terrible thing, and he's just kind of going on with his life, and then when he recognizes that there might be any kind of consequence for what he's done, he just starts completely folding like an omelet.
Yep.
Which I really appreciate. And there's also, while we're talking about his performance, there's a great bit where after Aurora is put to sleep by the curse, which notably Maleficent tries to undo.
Mm-hmm.
She does try to undo it, but after she's put to sleep, Stefan is talking to the fairies. He's like, she's dead, and then the fairy's like, she's not dead, she's just sleeping, and he gives this incredulous look that is.
He's like, she's only sleeping, and he just looks at them like, are you stupid, or do you just hate me?
It's great too, because this is preceded by an entire backhand. And keep in mind, these fairies are about the size of probably your hand, listener. He just fully backhand a fairy the size of his hand. How are you not dead? It's great. It's a great bit.
What do you think of the Bird Man?
I mean, I understand. This is the thing, right? Like, you can understand the necessity for something mechanically and still not really like it. Fundamentally, Diaval's presence, his presence is just sort of, he's meant to be a foil to Maleficent, very much so. And because she is really in the trenches emotionally after what happens to her, understandably. And he's just very much like, hey, you can do what you want to me, but it's not going to stop me from noting the fact that you are doing things that I'm not particularly happy with. And he sort of becomes, funnily enough, he becomes her cricket, like Pinocchio, like he becomes her cricket in a sense, because
Yes.
Aurora's under the false understanding that Maleficent is her fairy godmother, and so she can't really afford to be that conscience figure, so it has to be Diaval. And I understand his presence in here. I like the stuff that they do with his like makeup design and everything. I think there's some good stuff here that they did with him. I don't actually hate him as a character. I just sort of feel like there's something that feels a little forced about that he's even here. Like, there is an interesting angle with regards to Maleficent herself, because what she is doing every time he kind of speaks up about things he's taking issue with is she's effectively taking his voice where she hears something that she doesn't like. I think it does do a lot to not, I think the great thing about this movie is throughout, she's not like a perfect victim, right? She's very imperfect and does a lot of things that are not, they're kind of unsavory and mean and unhelpful. And, I think her treatment of Diaval is something that, it's clearly abusive, but it's pretty even-handed about where it's coming from, and how he responds to it. I think all of those things are well done. Overall, like, I have to give Wolverton credit for this script that I don't give to Alice in Wonderland. Because that's something that even movies that are, sort of more, quote, important about this kind of thing, like, they do have the problem of having sort of the perfect victim. And this movie genuinely does avoid that. And it's something I really appreciate. And all of this said, Diaval just feels kind of like an afterthought wedged in a little bit. I don't know what could have been done to ease that. It's just sort of something where I look at him and I'm like, why'd you have to be a man? What?
Yeah, I don't like that, Diaval, her little sidekick, is the one who gets to be a dragon.
Now that sucks. That just sucks. I'm not making any excuse or explanation for that. That just sucks. She should have been a dragon.
Yes. It is it's one of the best parts of the original, when she turns into a dragon and they have this big fight and there's flames everywhere, and she just says, no, Diaval, you be a dragon while I'm under this
iron net.
Yes, her weakness
is iron. This is a thing in fair folk and fairy legends. They're not pulling it out of their ass. It does feel a little bit like an ass pull if you're not aware of this, because, I don't know how, like, I know you didn't know that. I don't know how many people know about the fairies and iron thing.
No, I did not know that.
Iron, and it does play a good part. I do appreciate them going back to myths that are not directly related to the fairy tale, because iron and fairies don't come up in the Perrault story at all. And I do appreciate them kind of doubling back to folklore so that they could then integrate it and give the narrative some more stakes, even though we know that Maleficent's not going to die. But, it does give it a little more weight to the proceedings, that there is this thing that she does have weakness to.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't know. It just feels weird to me because she's,
Maleficent?
Mistress of all evil. Ultra powerful.
Yes.
Queen of the Moors. For some reason, they don't really. She just kind of becomes.
Yeah, I don't really get that. That's a weird elision. They just kind of skip over that one.
Yeah, it doesn't. When she's a kid, it does not feel like she's in any kind of special position.
She's just a kid.
And after she loses her wings and becomes, evil, then suddenly she's like the leader of the Moors, and she goes and sits on her throne, and some of the little ghouls are like, hey, what's going on? And the tree guys are like, no, you can't question this. This is how it is now. And it's like, why do the trees work for her?
Why do the trees work for her? Where is this coming from? I don't. This is like.
There are some leaps. It's the Moors after she takes over. Like, it's all like dark and disgusting and miserable, but also they want Aurora to want to live there, because that's what happens at the end of the movie. She says, I don't want to live with the fairies, I don't want to live in the castle, I want to go live in the Moors. And so then it's also nice, and I don't know if it's supposed to be getting more pleasant as Maleficent grows as a person. It feels like there might have been a deleted scene that said that, because it feels like that.
Yeah.
But they never say anything that indicates that.
Yeah. It's an odd one. This is, honestly, if we're being charitable about the wings thing, like we said before, you can make some arguments for some of the stuff that they do. It's a choice, at least. This doesn't feel like a choice. This feels like they're just declining to answer any questions here.
Yes, I think they don't want to answer the question. They just want to get the plot moving, which it's
fine, but it's a little odd, and I don't know. I feel like, and this does kind of like faintly tie into something else that I think about with regards to the movie as a whole. On an aesthetic level, there's a lot of stuff in the movie that feels like it should be maybe a little more heightened. If the fairy trio is one good example of that, because, I don't know, just exaggerate their faces a little more. That's just Imelda Staunton's face. That's just Leslie Manville's face. That's just their faces. it's a little disconcerting. You could still have their likenesses, just kind of zhuzh them up a little. I don't fucking know. And
Yeah,
this
I
this
don't know.
leads to just sort of a general problem where the nature of the movie, tonally, the whole Lord of the Rings thing, right? I'm not saying that no movie can look like this and not be compared to Lord of the Rings, but at some point you are actively asking for comparisons to Lord of the Rings when you're making and staging certain sequences in this manner. And when you have sort of this kind of semi grounded attempt at creating this reality, you kind of end up inadvertently inviting the audience to ask questions about the nature of the world that the movie is set in that will not be answered because that is not the nature of the actual narrative. So, like, this was something I think I brought up when we watched it. The movie Donkey Skin by Jacques Demy is a movie that is so dreamy and so fairy tale and doesn't really beg that you ask any meaningful questions about the world that it exists in. It's not like to the point that it starts to dissuade you from asking those questions, and successfully in my opinion. It's very kind of candy colored aesthetic, does a lot for that. This isn't a world wherein, you know, the causal like logic is asking me to ask questions about, oh, how does this work and how does that work. I don't think about those things, and I also didn't think about those things by and large when watching the Walt Disney Sleeping Beauty. But here I feel genuinely that a lot of the aesthetic decisions made and a lot of like a number of things here, they imply a history, but it's like a half measure of a history. It's not really delved into meaningfully, and very little is delved into meaningly. It feels like it has the structure of a lot of fairy tale elements, but the texture of something that is more, I guess I'll put it, storied, like something that has more history to it. I don't know. You may disagree with me on this, but this is how I feel about it. Like, it feels like,
No, I think
right,
you're
yeah.
basically correct.
It's mm-hmm.
It's there's a lot
Yeah, yeah.
unseen. I feel like you could elaborate it on a sequel, but I feel like the sequel's not going to. I haven't seen it yet, but I
Right,
just it's
yeah,
just a
yeah.
vibe.
You know, I feel like the movie could stand to either have some elaboration on some of its elements, or try and redirect, like aikido, like redirect that energy into something else, something. Just it just kind of feels like a weird bunch of vestigial dangly bits that leave me asking questions that they probably didn't want me asking to begin with. And that might be a me problem in part
Yeah,
because I am the way I am and I overthink these things a little bit.
I think in general, for quite a few reasons, the movie needs to be longer. It needs another like 10,
Yeah,
15
no,
minutes at least.
it needed some elaboration. It feels a little, it's paced. The cadence is sort of rough draft esque. It feels like there's a lot of strong ideas in here. I know that, and there are ideas that pretty firmly work. But then there are other ideas that don't feel like they were really thought about at all. It all gets a little muddy.
Yeah, I had a couple more scenes in the second act with Maleficent
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
Aurora, and they can talk about their lives and their wants and desires, and maybe that would tell us a little bit more about the
Yeah, yeah,
world when they do
exactly.
that, and maybe trim a little bit of the
Which
climax.
is funny because the climax also feels, it's weird. It's like I once described the original Mad Max movie as running breathlessly in circles. And that's kind of how the climax feels.
Mm,
It just sort of like it feels too long and too short at the same time. And I know that, oh,
yeah,
pacing is like a bit of a nebulous cop-out bugaboo that people throw around a lot, but I do firmly think that there are some pretty staggering structural issues in that third act that you could have made room for some other stuff. I think, a big CGI thing, I don't know, I think it just feels less, ironically less climactic than her just confronting Stefan would have been. I mean, and I know that, we're dealing with a pretty heavy, like, metaphor here, like a pretty heavy allegory. I understand not wanting to get too deep in the weeds there, and I understand that, when it concerns this thing happening to someone, anything that is taken from someone so horribly, you're not always going to find closure, right? But you're also making a big crowd pleaser movie, right? And ironically, I just feel like it would have been more cathartic if she just faced off with Stefan quietly.
I think part of the problem is that post the wing removal, there isn't enough between Stefan and Maleficent. She talks to him again when she's giving the curse, and then, 16 years go by, and they don't talk to each other at all. And she's back at the castle, and he's trying to kill her, and they have, like, 2 lines between them. And it's like, you don't want to say anything to each other after all this time.
I think that's the thing, right? It almost feels like they were reticent to really give Stefan much character, lest they be seen as sort of sympathizing with, let's be real, effectively a rapist. Like, for the sake of the narrative, in terms of his role in it, he's a rapist, right? And I feel like there was kind of this fear, like, ironically, right? Because Maleficent is one of the great villains of Disney, probably the great villain, the most iconic. And ironically, she doesn't get that great of a villain because he's just sort of a guy who's breaking down. And I understand that, what I said, like, it is what I said about, like, he is just a mediocre guy who did this horrible thing to her to, get ahead in life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't give him character. Oddly enough, and this is gonna be another wild invocation from me, like with last time when I mentioned Secret Honor. For some reason, I find myself thinking of Rupert Pupkin because he's pretty pathetic. No, I'm not saying. No. I'm not saying he's that bad, and I'm not saying I would ask the character to be that bad. I'm saying you can look at someone who is deeply, like, mediocre in a lot of ways and still have him be interesting. I'm not saying make him similar to that.
I don't think... I would go in the complete different direction. I don't think he needs to be interesting. I think he needs to be even more hateable.
Right. I mean, mutually exclusive. Like, he can be interesting and also...
I know they're not mutually exclusive, but, like, Rupert Pupkin is awesome. He's a little baby boy.
That is fair.
King of Comedy is a funny movie.
King of Comedy makes me squirm.
And I would have him, in the final battle, it would feel more, earned if Maleficent was like, "You're an evil rapist, and I'm gonna throw you off the building."
Yeah. I mean, I think just anything, though, I think is the big point. Just anything. Just do something.
Like, you fought, you destroyed me, but I'm stronger than ever. Stupid.
Yeah, like even in the wake of making, like even in the face of making a crowd pleaser, you still have a lot of options for her to engage with him at the end, and she really doesn't, and that feels just like such a missed opportunity. It's something. And also, I just wish they had Charlton Copley play that character with his own accent. There's no reason why not.
Yeah, it's not Scotland.
It's not Scotland.
Made up.
It's made up.
What's her name? Super 8. Elle Fanning. She doesn't have a Scottish accent. No one else does.
No one else does. Wait, no, you're right. You're right.
You know who they considered for the role, or who auditioned for the role of Princess Aurora?
Who's that?
Anya Taylor-Joy.
I'm not. Color me the most unsurprised person in the history of surprises. Damn, that tracks. I do think
She
Fanning.
already looks like Maleficent, so.
I do think Fanning is delightful in it. You know, I think she's got a.
Fanning is fine.
I think she's got a good presence, and I think that's just kind of what's important here. Ironically, though, I do feel it is kind of funny how like it's not like there were a lot of edges to Aurora to begin with, but I feel like whatever there was kind of got shaved down in the process of this movie, which is funny to think about. I don't think it's a real problem. I just think it's kind of funny.
I don't think I entirely agree with that. I think, you point to when she finds out about the stuff that her true parents and the king, she gets pretty mad at the fairies. I'd say way more mad than she did in the original.
This is true.
She like storms off and goes to the castle by herself.
I see. Yeah, that is a fair point. I do just generally, I don't know. There's a lot of little weird miscalculations, but I want to make it clear that again, like I said with Alice in Wonderland, these flaws do feel human. Like they feel very much like the natural result of people making decisions and not all of them working.
They don't feel like dumb ideas from the board of directors.
You know something? All in all, even though we spent that whole episode just reaming Alice in Wonderland, this is us being nice. This is us being pretty kind to both of these movies. This one is better than the other one in my opinion.
This one is better. I gave this one like a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
I think I gave Alice like a 5 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. This one I think is much better. I legitimately think this is a good movie with some flaws. Mm-hmm. Very interesting flaws, which I would rather than the flaws that we'll see later. Oh, boy.
I'm almost excited. In a perverse way, I'm excited.
I mean, like, the next episode is the beginning of the end, Roxy.
Which one is it next?
That's when the next one is Cinderella.
Cinderella.
Directed by Kenneth Branagh. And that is, the first one of
it's the first
that's a direct
great remake.
It's not a sequel or a prequel or a different perspective on the original tale. It is just straight up a remake.
Yeah. I don't think that movie's bad. I think it's fine to the point.
I've never seen it.
To the point that I worry a little bit about how much we're going to have to say about it. This episode's been interesting because we have been kind of going a little out of order compared to Alice in Wonderland, and I think it's like
I feel the exact opposite. I think I re-listened to our Alice conversation. I'm like, damn, we don't talk enough about like what actually happens in this movie, and so I tried to remedy that here.
Right? Yeah. I do think. I mean, to be fair, it doesn't feel like a lot happens in that movie.
A lot happens in Alice in Wonderland, but not a lot important happens.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's but that's the thing, right? It's so, yeah.
You could cut that movie down to being like a short.
You could cut it down to being a short, but it wouldn't
understand the plot.
It wouldn't make $1 billion. This didn't make $1 billion. This made like $700 something. Like it was $758. So less than Alice in Wonderland, despite being better. Which continues that firm belief that I have that the response to one of these movies is generally inverse to its quality. Like,
I feel like people like this at the time.
People did like this.
We're talking about $750 million.
No, I know. That's a lot of fucking money. I'm just saying that it's beginning. The ball is starting to roll down the hill. And I have a feeling that as we get deeper in there, that didn't happen with Little Mermaid. We'll get there. I will say that. It didn't happen with Little Mermaid, but that's because they botched things with regards to distribution so fucking badly. Real mess. Is there anything else that we have neglected to mention?
I feel like we've gotten all the the main points out of the way.
This is true, yeah.
This is one of the few ones that's going to have a sequel, so we'll get to that
Yeah,
later.
I feel like anything that we miss here, we will probably readdress after listening back to this. And we'll like my thought is like, if there's anything we've missed, we'll tackle it really quickly as the intro to the next episode that we do on Maleficent, and then work into the actual meat of that movie, which I have never seen either. Neither of us have seen it.
I'm already thinking about stuff like that for Alice when I re-listened to it, you know.
I
said we would circle back to American McGee, and then I forgot to do that.
We will talk about
tune in
American
when we get
McGee.
to Alice Through the Looking Glass, and we will talk about American McGee.
It's funny, though. I've never played through American McGee's Alice all the way through.
Well, I haven't either, but I've looked at them enough. I've seen Let's Plays and reviews, so
you're in there.
I know the visuals, because that's what we were talking about mostly, the visuals.
And then in that time, I'm going to read the Alice stuff, because I didn't with the first one, because I didn't realize that was something that I would be doing.
Do you think Angelina Jolie would reprise her role as Maleficent for Kingdom Hearts 4?
I think if they asked her, I think she would do it. But they wouldn't do it. I don't...
They'd be scared. We only called James Woods.
You're gonna come at me with that, aren't you? You're just gonna fucking clothesline me like that.
Well, the only reason I mentioned it is because, you know, Jolie loves Maleficent the way Woods loves Hades.
Yes, that's true.
I feel like she would be open
she
to come
would
back.
I feel like she would take,
even in small things.
I feel like she would take the opportunity, and you know, it really, I do really want to stress, she is very good in this. She's really shooting for her all there, and unlike some people working in that weird little Disney circuit, she wasn't basically demanding an Academy Award for her Disney related thing, unlike some people whose names begin with J and end with O and Anthony Russo. But
I think whoever plays Hades will probably get shot by James Woods.
Just gonna sit there and be like, let them fight.
And then he'll run away and hide out in a boat and then shoot himself like in Videodrome.
Boat. I forgot about the boat. we're gonna have to spoiler this for Videodrome spoilers.
Oh, sorry, spoilers for Videodrome.
Oh shit!
Oh, that's a good movie.
That is a good movie.
We should watch that instead.
I would gladly talk about Videodrome. Oh, but yes. Anyways, if there's anything I have to say overall, it would be, like we said at the beginning, engage with these things in good faith. If you're interested, read some of the fairy tales that are serving as material for this stuff, because it's all very interesting. You know, I know these are stories for kids, but they're interesting stuff, and they, you know, you can find a lot of interesting things relating to structure and everything like that. I would say that about wraps it up, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think we covered about everything.
Right.
I'm looking in my notes if there's anything else I want to say. I took a lot of notes in this movie.
I took less notes than you, I think.
Yeah.
I think I pretty much covered all of my notes. So, other than the one question that I had regarding Maleficent's, you know, like, I did want to say this one last thing. So Maleficent basically, you know, when Stefan begs her, when you know, when Maleficent's like, you know, beg again, and I'm like, yes.
It's like,
yes, absolutely. Stefan begs her not to kill Maleficent. She's like, okay, well, you know, alright, I'll double back a little bit. She'll fall into a sleep-like death, right? And I'm like, okay, well, you have the later scene where she tries to undo the curse, and she can't, because she said no force on Earth will be able to change this curse, right? And I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, why not have her at the beginning not rescind the curse, and then when she gets to know her, uh, then try to ease back on it and only end up at she will fall asleep. You know, it feels like it would have made more sense for her to be almost more cruel initially, so that.
No. Because what you're forgetting is the true love's kiss bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because she specifically says, it's a sleep that can be
Mm-hmm.
woken by a true love's kiss. You can't bring people back from
Mm-hmm.
the dead, but you can wake them up from sleep. And that is a callback to when she's younger, and Stefan gives him what he calls a true
Oh.
love's kiss. So this is kind of her way to say, like, this is the bullshit you
Oh,
offered me.
okay.
Since you pretended it's real,
I
that
did
can save your
forget
daughter.
that. That is good. That is a good beat.
Yes.
I forgot about that entirely. That's great. And I think. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I liked that bit.
Um, I think that about wraps it up. That is episode 2 of live action Remorse. You can find me on YouTube as Songbird Swordlily. I'm Songbird Swordlily in most, really. If you look that up, you will probably find me. You can find me on YouTube, on Tumblr. I still have a Twitter I haven't deleted out of sheer spite. And I have a Blue Sky. And you will probably be able to find this podcast and our previous episode and all future episodes both on my my YouTube, Songbird Swordlily, and the Nikki's YouTube, Blue Tomorrows, and on Spotify as Live Action Remorse.
Yes, you handle all the Spotify stuff, so I don't really know the specifics.
Thank you for listening, and stay tuned in future for more as we next cover Kenneth Branagh's Cinderella.
Yes, we will be. So if you want to prepare ahead of time, we will be covering Cinderella. Hopefully this won't take too long. Since in the time between us recording episode 1 and releasing episode 1, 2 live action
They're coming out faster than we can handle them.
Mufasa
they
and Snow
both
White
came out and Snow White bombed, and everyone is going to learn the wrong lessons from this. I'm sure everyone's going to be so fucking normal, I swear to God.
Yes, but we had technical problems. This time
it should be smoother.
We should be out on a better pace. I mean, you guys didn't even know that there was a different pace because that was episode 1. But I think we should be able to get these out. Decently quickly.
And thank you for listening.
And so that's about wraps it up. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Thank you to the lovely Roxy for talking with me for almost 2 hours now. And
yes,
have a nice night.